Time for the Tesla and Palantir weekly update. Going to also include a few other charts as well, so stay tuned for that. But starting with Tesla, we're going to look at the weekly chart. We're just going to look at this fib to start off with from the 2024 top in December and also the bottom down here in April. So last week, I talked about this 406.80, how it's imperative to get back above it to get more bullish, but it did not, right? It tried to, but all price really did is go back up to resistance, the 429, and get rejected and come back down to close below. So really nothing has changed. It's the same exact thing as last week, right? The range of last week was pretty wide, right? Basically into the 430s down to the 380s. This week was pretty much similar, right? Went up to 428 and just got rejected there and came back down to the 380s here again. So what we're looking at for price is stuck in a range, trying to break out. More consolidation is what I see. 406.80, 383.76, that is our current range. Is it going to change? Well, we can look at a few other things with the Ichimoku cloud here on this chart. We can see that the conversion line was basically the confirmation of resistance as well, right? It broke below last week, came back up, touched it basically exactly at 428.42, and then immediately sold back off. So it was just a mean reversion back to resistance. So now it's time for more consolidation, but the question remains, does it need to come back down and touch the baseline here at 373.64? Does it need to come back down closer to the weekly cloud or the 50% fib at 351.39? And the answer is it's possible, right? It's very, very possible, but there is one thing that we have to pay attention to on this chart to determine if it really wants to go lower, and that's going to be on the 2-week Ichimoku cloud right here, which is the conversion line right there, which finally got back tested for the first time since September. So that is a good development, which kind of lines up with that 618 fib. So that's 385.59, or sorry, 385.95. And the 618, 383.76. So there is some potential to find some stability here. And if week after week after week, we can see it stabilize in this 383, 385 zone, then there is potential to avoid retesting lower. But there is that confluence as well with the 2-week baseline, which is also at that 50% fib at 351. So we do know one thing. If any week closes below this 383, then there is going to be a good chance of a deeper back test. But for now, it's a successful gap fill. It's a successful back test of the 2-week conversion line, and it's a successful back test of the 383. So going back to the weekly chart, all I really see is more consolidation, and it's just going to be a battle, right? Very bullish chart, but it's time for some consolidation, maybe trying to get closer and closer to the weekly cloud until it's ready to go higher. But ultimately, nothing's going to change on this chart until one of these levels breaks. And whichever level breaks, that's going to be the direction it goes for the short term. And then once it's ready, it'll continue back towards all-time highs regardless. So let's just watch that range, 383, 406, see how weekly candles continue to close within that range, or if it can finally break that range and possibly even continue higher. And next we have Palantir. Palantir did actually finally close another weekly candle back below the 1.618 log base fib from the 2021 top, and that's 157.62. I was wanting it to close above it to avoid anything possibly lower, but we did not get that. So what we're going to see in the weeks to come is maybe a battle of trying to get back above it. So going back to this point in time right here, back in March, there was something similar where it closed below levels, right? It closed below the 78.13, and then it quickly got reclaimed the following week and went higher. So possibly this could be something similar. And there's actually even more similarities to the last time too. We can go to the Ichimoku cloud and just take a look that it was very similar to this time that we're experiencing here, because it also closed the week below not only that 1.272 right here, but also the baseline right here, which we finally see again here. And during this time, I was suspecting maybe it wants to get closer and closer to the weekly Ichimoku cloud before going higher, but no, it just decided to immediately reverse it and go higher. So there's one of two choices here for Palantir. There's either going to be a longer consolidation now that it's underneath both of these, and it is going to go try to get closer and closer to the cloud before going higher, or it's going to do exactly what it did last time right here and just immediately reverse it and continue the journey higher. But nonetheless, this still is a very bullish chart. We can also take a look here at the monthly conversion line here on the monthly chart. It's down here at 136.82, and that hasn't really been touched since April 2025. So touching that before continuation higher would kind of make sense. So I am watching that a lot, the 136.82. So we'll see if this 157.62 cannot get broken. We might need to go a little bit lower first before higher. And there is some confluence also into that range. We can go switch it to linear scale, the fibs. And there's a lot of confluence of support around that 147.31 and that 136 zone. So going back to the weekly chart here, we can see we don't really have to assume the 130s just yet, because when we use linear scale, we can clearly see 171.46 and 147.31 is just stuck in that range. So price could, in actuality, just stay in this range, getting closer and closer to the cloud, consolidate horizontally for a while until ready to break out. But if it needed a little bit more liquidity, we can just take a look at that conversion line. So maybe the path could do something like this, where maybe it does need to go down there, touch the conversion line, maybe spend a few weeks down there, and then finally get more and more bullish like that. So next week and the rest of the month and also into December, I'm going to be watching this 147 down to the mid 130s as support, because that's going to be important to maintain the momentum to keep blasting off towards the 200s and above. But so far, this is a monthly bearish engulfing candle. I know a lot of people are worried about that, but ultimately, when you look at it in comparison to the monthly conversion line, it is well above it, which means it's very healthy, which also means the momentum and the trend is very strong. So it doesn't really concern me that much. And losing that log-based fib right here at 157 could just mean more time. That's all it could mean, right? I don't suspect it's going to be the beginning of anything super bearish. I just think it's going to be more time, because when we go to the weekly chart, there's still no touch of any of the weekly Ichimoku cloud, and it hasn't really touched it ever, right? Since it broke out. Since it broke out back in 2023, it actually never touched it. So, you know, a longer consolidation at some point in time would make sense before that continuation higher. So going back to the linear scale here, 147, right? 147.31 down towards the monthly conversion line, 136.82 is what I'm watching really for the rest of the month of November and going into December as well, until it's ready to continue its journey higher. And next we got Coinbase. So Coinbase, we are at a point where price is at a range that it was before it went into all-time high territory. And that is this June 2025 zone right here, where price broke out of this 245.66, back tested it a couple of weeks, and then went higher. But this week actually did close below that level. But we can actually, when we go to the weekly chart here, we can see that it's done it before, right? It did close a level below that before, right here, and then it quickly reclaimed it to go higher. So the important thing is, really, we didn't make a lower low. From that low right here, yes, it wicked below it, but the body of the candle did stay above it. So that's good. That's at 235.29. So that's something that I really want to pay attention to right there. So that's a very important development. So with that, we're going to go back to that 2-week chart here and just take a look at the 2-week Ichimoku cloud. And I think this is the most important takeaway of the chart right here, because when we put it on, we can see this trend is still very much alive. And we've seen this pattern happen throughout the 2024 period and even into 2025. So it broke out of the 2-week cloud, went to back test it, and was building a base. Then it made one last lower low before continuing higher. And then it did the exact same thing, where it went sideways, consolidated. Then it broke below the 2-week baseline and the conversion line, exactly what it did right now, and went to the bottom of the cloud right there, which was the 618 fib, 158, and then it reversed and went higher. And now we are actually at the top of the 2-week cloud, and it did hold, right? We can zoom in here. You can see the 2-week cloud did hold as a support. So the question remains, is it going to be exactly like last time where in fact it went to the bottom of the cloud, wicked through that fib and went higher? Well, we have to consider that if it starts to get inside this 2-week cloud here and starts to close 2-week candles like it did last time inside of it. So far, it's similar in the fact that it closed above right here, but then it entered the 2-week cloud then later on. So if it does enter the cloud and then after another 2 weeks it closes inside, then that does open the door to the 197 and maybe even a wick below into the low 190s or so. That becomes possible. So we got to really watch this 2-week cloud, right? And granted, it's going to be another 2 weeks until the candle closes because this 2-week cloud just closed yesterday. So it's going to require some patience, which means we need to pay attention to how price really reacts. So if price can really stabilize on top of that 2-week cloud, then we'll see a continuation easily back to the 300s, 318s, and back to all-time highs. But if it stays inside this 2-week cloud, basically anywhere from the 240s down to the 230s, like if it closes anywhere in there, then that would lead to the potential of a deeper consolidation for another higher low. But in essence, that's all it really is, right? It would only be another higher low because higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high. And yes, even a back test down into the low 190s or even a little bit lower still would be another higher low from back in March. So nothing is damaged on this chart. We're seeing history we're seeing history repeat itself all the time. And it's not even a guarantee to always say lower, right? Yes, there was a pattern that had happened before, but if this cloud can hold and if it can get back above this 245.66, then the potential to go back to the 290s and the 300s becomes greater and greater. So that's why I really want to focus on the 2-week chart there, because you can really visualize the pattern of what Coinbase is doing. Big breakouts, big back tests, big breakouts, big back tests. The only question is, how deep is this back test going to get? And the answer is going to lie on how price reacts at this 240, 245 zone for the next 2 weeks. So we'll have to be patient with that, and we'll have to see if this 245.66 can actually flip back to a support within the next week or two, and then continue the journey higher. So patience is going to be required as usual for Coinbase, but as you can visualize, this structure is fine. There is nothing damaged on this chart. It's just repeating history over and over and over again because it's a very volatile asset. So I'll be watching that 240, 245 zone, try to find stability there to avoid a deeper backtest. And next we got strategy, MSTR. And I talked about it last week, right? I said it made a lower low right here. We had a lower low from back here, so that would mean probably more weakness, and that's exactly what happened. Especially last week did go close below this 204.57, which meant that it's not ready to reverse any kind of that trend. And now even price closed below this 180.45, and all of this is on linear scale too, because it kind of represents what's going on. But what really I am looking at, yes, the next week's support target in order to avoid going lower is going to be this 163.66. But ultimately, what I'm looking at is now where price is finally back into a gigantic demand zone, right? Finally, after all this time, it did not backtest it here, but it finally backtested here. So a big, huge previous resistance zone before the giant breakout. We just retraced it all and are back here. So is price going to consolidate down further? And I think the answer is, well, probably yes, until there is stability. And we don't have any chance of stability now because levels keep breaking as support. So the destination within this green box could, in fact, even be the purple down here, this purple 200-week moving average, which is at 139.82. So if at any point we start to close candles below this 163.66, which could be next week, right? If that happens, then there is a good potential of retesting that 200-week moving average before any chance of a reversal. But this is a giant demand zone. The deeper it goes into that demand zone, the better chance it has to hold. And ultimately, what else kind of coincides with this 200-week moving average? It is the cycle top of 2021. Right, that is right there at this fib, which is the one fib, which is 131.50. So This could, in fact, want to retrace everything and do a successful backtest of the 2021 top if this 163.66 gets lost. But ultimately, the setup was there since it made that lower low. It just wanted to keep going lower. Now we're breaking each fib level as a support, flipping into resistance. So there is really no stability yet. And in order to have a trend reversal, we need to find stability. So we're just going to have to wait. And until then, the trend is still down, but this is a huge demand zone. So we'll see how deep it needs to get inside of this demand zone here. And we're going to watch one level at a time. But since there is confluence of this 139, 130 zone, that could be the final destination now before any chance of reversal. But the good news is it's getting there so fast, so much in a hurry that there could be a nice reversal back towards the 200s and above later on. So the risk reward in this situation, in this demand zone, is actually getting better and better. So we'll see how things develop. But I think we got to be patient still, because right now it's trying to bottom fish into a giant zone, a giant demand zone. So we just need to be patient. We need to wait for there is signs of stability. We need to hold levels. And right now, no levels are holding. So next week, 163.66. Got to find stability there to avoid going lower. But if not, the 130s look like the likely target. Next, we have Robinhood. And if you remember last week, I did talk about this fib, right? From the February high to the April low. I talked about log scale 110.62 and also the linear scale 114.29. And I was like, this is our zone to stay above to get more bullish sooner. But the candles did, in fact, close below both those levels. And also, it closed below the Ichimoku baseline as well for the first time since it broke out back in April. So does this mean that it wants to do an automatic retest of 93.71? That could be a possibility, right? But first, we got to put on the log scale all-time high back in 2021 and the all-time low back in 2022. And we want to put this on linear scale because this is showing something interesting now, right? It actually did maintain this 106.27 right here, even though it did close below that baseline. So this is important, right? What price has done is just break out of the 1.618 and now finally backtest this linear scale 1.272 from the 2021 top, right? So the 90s will only become possible. The $93 zone that I talked about will only become possible if this 106.27 breaks. So I'm going to be watching this all next week, and especially for a monthly candle close too. If we close the month above it, when we go to monthly candles right here, that would just be a big breakout back test of that zone, and then maybe you can avoid the 90s. But there is more confluence of that 93, 91 zone because the monthly Ichimoku conversion line is at 91.76, which is pretty much at that 93 zone. So there's a lot of confluence that maybe it does need to go deeper into the 90s first before higher, but I want to see if price can actually find stability here first at this 106.27, and more importantly, even reclaim this baseline as a support too at 108.39. So if we're going to watch anything for the rest of November, it's going to be this 106.27 and this 108.39. If that does break next week, then we do have to look lower, right? We have to look lower back to these fibs right here. Let's go back to those fibs right here. We'll just draw them real quickly. We'll have to look lower to the log scale, 93.71, and go to the monthly chart, which also coincides with that 93 or 91.76 conversion line as well. So very important. 106, 108, we got to maintain that zone for support. If not, Robinhood is going into the 90s before it finds some stability to continue higher. And next we got Bitcoin here, and Bitcoin, I want to show a couple of things at the same time. So I have a fib pulled up right here from the 2024 March top and the August 24 bottom. So this is log scale. This is something that got rejected here at the 2.272 at 122.390. Perfect rejection week after week after week, and that caused a cascading effect, eventually going all the way back down to the 1.272, 82.226, which coincides exactly with the bottom of the weekly cloud. So if we're going to find stability for Bitcoin, this is the zone. This is exactly the zone. We cannot see any more weakness, or this is going back towards the March 2024 high, right? If this is ever lost, this 82,000, guess where it's going? It's going to 73 or to the low 70s. That's exactly where it's going. So we must hold this zone. This is a must hold zone for 82,000, 80,000. Like the bottom of the cloud is like 80,800. It's a must hold zone. If this does not hold, then yes, we're going lower. So this is so far trying to find stability. Sunday, tomorrow is the weekly candle close. We'll see how things develop, but this is what I'm watching the most for Bitcoin, right? If we're going to find stability, it has to be right here. And if successful, then perhaps it can go back up towards the 87,003 and try to get back above that. Once it's back above that, we can look for 94 and above. So this is our range right now. This is our support. Everything above right now is our resistance. But, you know, staying inside the cloud is still a healthy consolidation. It's still a normal development before it continues the journey higher, but it just can't lose that, right? If it loses it, then there's a great potential of going into the low 70s again before any chance of a reversal. So that's important. Also, I want to just point out a couple of things here with the Bollinger Band. And the weekly Bollinger Band is very extended to the downside here. We can see that's at 94,124. It's very extended to the downside. It hasn't been this extended to the downside ever, right? It's over 10,000 point difference from the bottom of the Bollinger Band to where price currently is, right? We haven't really experienced it before, right? Even last time, it wasn't that expanded to the downside, right? That was during 2024. When we go back towards 2022, it wasn't even that expanded to the downside, right? When we go back to what was it during COVID, right? It was maybe similar, right? Maybe it was kind of similar to what we're seeing now, right? Very extended to the downside, and that's it. But we haven't experienced that in a very long time, but that kind of marked the bottom, and then it was like a nice recovery afterwards, right? This marked a temporary bottom, then it went higher, and then basically it drifted lower one more time before the bottom hit in, and then it went higher. So there's a couple scenarios, right, where it could do something like this, where it's a temporary bottom, but just back to resistance and then goes lower one more time. Or it could be like a COVID bottom and it just immediately reverses in the weeks to come to go back to the highs above. But this is a very rare situation that we're experiencing right now. Very rare, right? Being this expanded over 10,000 points to the downside of the lower band, it's very rare. Like usually it hits the lower bound and it bounces, like it hits the lower band and it bounces. This time there is no bounce, and it's just basically continuing expanding downward, which is rare, right? So there should be at least a mean reversion back to the lower band to 94,000 at some point. But we'll have to see how the weekly candle closes, and we'll have to go back to those fibs that I showed you before right here, and that Ichimoku cloud, the 82,226, 80,000, that's really the zone to hold. If we can find stability exactly there, then I think price can go back to that 94,000. And what else exists around that 94,000? It is the 1.618. That's where that lower Bollinger Band was. So confluence of some resistance potentially in the weeks to come, but now we know what's really important to get this bull trend back on target, and it is going to be that 94,357. So this is the range right now, 80,000, 82,000 up to 94, and it really can't get more bullish until this 94,357 is broken as a resistance, and then it flips the cloud back to support to go higher. But right now, we're just looking for stability. So far, we have it, and we got to keep finding it for the weeks to come to avoid any deeper backtests into previous 2024 highs. And next we got Ethereum here, and Ethereum, we do see that price is retesting the top of the weekly Ichimoku cloud right now after it broke out of the cloud back in July of this year. So a big breakout, rejection at previous all-time highs, came a lot deeper than any of us really expected, but now we're here. Now we're at a very important zone, and this is it, right? I would like to see this held, and I would like to see reclaiming this 29.24 again as a support in order to continue higher. So now it's a battle, but I think there is a good chance of stabilizing here. And the reason why is if we switch to the 2-week chart, we can see it did actually hit the bottom of the 2-week cloud. And actually in the future over here, The top of the 2-week cloud is really around 27.40. So it's basically the same exact price as it is now. But is it going to be a longer consolidation here until it's ready to continue higher? Or is it going to just do like a V-shaped recovery back to resistance? Well, I think it could take some time, especially if it's losing this 3170 zone, right? This baseline right here. If it loses that for the 2-week candle close tomorrow, then it could take more time before any reclaiming of support. So we're going to have to pay attention to this area. But the bottom of the 2-week cloud, it kind of coincides with the top of the 1-week cloud right here, right? Just a little bit underneath it. So this has a really good chance of finding stability right now. And so far it is. So what I would like to see is tomorrow, right? There's 1 day, 9 hours left until the 2-week candle close and the weekly candle close. And we'll see if it can actually power through tomorrow and even close back above this 2924.3. If it can close above that tomorrow, then that's actually a really good sign of perhaps it wants to just create a nice little V bottom and get out of there. So we'll see, right? But at least I would love to stay above the cloud. 27.44, that's what I'm watching the most. Try to stay above it for a weekly candle close. Better yet, 29.24. But nonetheless, this is so far a successful backtest of the cloud and also the bottom of the 2-week cloud here. So we're going to just keep our eyes on this zone. So far, it's just another higher low from before, right? From the March bottom, we got a higher high, higher low, higher high, a deep higher low, but there's a lot of confluence in this zone, and there's even more at this 25.32 if price chose to go back a little bit deeper. So we'll see if price does need to retest a little bit deeper, but we'll take our cues from how this weekly candle closes tomorrow. And ideally, I want to see stability at least above this cloud around 27.44. And after that, try to get back above this 29.24. So it's a battle of support right now, but so far it's holding. And what we need to see for a reversal is just stability right here in this zone to avoid a deeper backtest. But again, there is some confluence of the 2500s in that zone, right? We got this 618 fib here, massive previous resistance flipping to a support. So there is potential to go a little bit deeper first before higher, but there's no guarantee if we can find this stability on top of the cloud right here. So let's watch that 27.44 the most going into the weekly candle close tomorrow and into next week as well.